Welcome back to the program. Okay, we have been in the book of Hebrews and we will stay there. We are going to be looking at the let us of the book of Hebrew. Okay, not the kind you find in a garden, but we're going to look at two little words, L-E-T and U-S. Let us, okay? So we don't know really for sure who wrote the book of Hebrews. Many think it's Paul, but there's a lot of different ideas on who may have done that. But at any rate here, we know that whoever wrote this was inspired by the Holy Spirit to write it. And there's a lot here for us. So we've already looked at some of what I want to look at here in previous programs. But we're in chapter 4 here. And last week we looked at two words, let us, but let us fear. Now let me read the whole verse. It says, "Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us fear lest any of you should seem to have failed to reach it." Okay, so a real quick review here. We find here that the Jews here, they're being persecuted because they are Christians. Being a Christian was illegal by the government, and so they were under persecution. But temple worship was legal. So many of them were leaving Christianity to go back to temple worship, thinking they could do both. But they could not, because to really get back into the temple, they had to deny that Jesus was the Son of God, that he was the Messiah. They had to deny that. So they were giving up their faith. So the author here, the writer here, he's just like, oh, you can't do this. This is, you cannot give up your faith. And he's telling them, he's reminding them of what happened in the Old Testament with the children of Israel when they came up out of Israel. And we talked about that last week, but we know that many of them did not enter into the promised land because of two things. One was their lack of faith, and the other was their disobedience toward God. Now, rest here is mentioned in three different ways in the book of Hebrews. The one way is the rest of the promised land. The other one is the rest that we have through salvation through Jesus Christ. And the third one is the eternal rest of the new heaven and the new earth. So last week in the Old Testament, the rest that was talked about here was the rest of the promised land. So in verse 4, he's saying, remember, he says, let us fear that the same thing that came upon the Israelites in the Old Testament do not come upon us. And one of the things I pointed out last week, he says, let us, that us, and all these let us's that we're going to talk about, he's included himself, and it includes us as well. We need to fear. That doesn't mean we go around trembling all the time, but we need to be very much aware and be very much aware and with great, how can I say it, respect of what happened in the Old Testament, because we don't want that happening to us. All right, so let me think here. So our second let us that we want to look at here is in chapter 4, verse 11. It says, let us therefore strive to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. All right, so he's saying, let us strive. So what does the word strive mean? Well, I think we could say it means to go after something with great eagerness, okay, with great devotion, to pursue it without stopping until you reach the goal that you have set in mind. And that's what he's telling them here. He says, let us go on, let us pursue our salvation, let us pursue our faith to enter into the rest that God has for us. I want to go to chapter 26 of Genesis. I want to read a story of Isaac and how that he strove to accomplish a goal that he had set out to do. So let's go ahead and turn there. So there again, this is in Genesis chapter 26, and we're going to read starting at verse 17, and we'll read down through 22, I think. So let me go ahead and read this. This is from the ESV. Starting at verse 17 of chapter 26. It says, So Isaac departed from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. And Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, which the Philistines had stopped after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." So he called the name of the well Esek, because they contended with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that also. So he called its name Sitnah. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, saying, "For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." So in this story here, we see Isaac. He set in his mind that he was going to redig the wells that his father Abraham had dug, because back then, obviously, the wells were so very, very important. They had to have the water in that land. So Isaac sets out to redig these wells because the Philistines, those dreaded Philistines, okay, that we hear so much in the Old Testament coming against the children of Israel, they were just like a thorn in their side. Okay, the arch enemy of Israel was the Philistines. But at any rate, they had filled in all these wells of Abraham. So Isaac, there again, he sets out to redig these wells. So he goes into the first well that's talked about here, and he has his servants, and the servants dig up this well, and sure enough, they find water. But what happens? The herdsmen of Gerar, where they dug up this well, quarreled. They fought with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." And more or less, "Hey, this is our water. Get out of here." So Isaac, what does he do? He doesn't get into a confrontation with them. He picks up his gear and gets his men, and away they go to the next well. Okay, and you start to see how he's pursuing eagerly, relentlessly pursuing this goal that he had, and that was to get a well for the people. So he goes to the second well, and the same thing happens. The servants dig up the well, there's water in there, and they think, all right. But what happens? Well, the enemy comes again, and they say, "No, this is our water." And so there again, without a confrontation, Isaac and his men, they get their gear and everything, and they move on again. See, they're not going to give up. Okay, they're relentless in their finding a well for the people. So they go to the third well, and they go and they dig it up, and there's water there, and no one confronts them. No one comes and says, "Hey, you can't have this water." So at that point, Isaac knows this is the well from God that he would have us to have. And in verse 22, let me just go ahead and read this. "And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, saying, 'For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land.'" So they found that well, okay, that they could be fruitful in the land. So the point of reading that was to give you a better idea of the word strive way back here in the book of Hebrews in the New Testament. So when the author of Hebrews tells them, he says, "Let us therefore strive to enter that rest," we have a better idea what he's talking about. Be relentless, okay? Be eager, be relentless. Don't give up. Pursue it until you get there. And that's what he's really trying to get to them. So the two things we see so far is that, one, we remember what happened to the children of Israel when they came up out of Egypt. Just remember that many of them did not go into the God's rest, the promised land, because, again, disbelief and lack of faith. And he's saying, keep that in your heart. Be aware of that. He uses the word, "let us fear." Okay, he even said, "let us fear." But be aware of it and be determined it doesn't happen to you. And the next one, "let us strive." okay, to enter that rest. So there is something we have to do here, okay? It's not like we go out and have to do works to be saved. That's not what he's talking about. But there is something that has to happen within inside of us, spiritually, in our minds as well, is that we need to set our hearts on the goal of reaching the final rest, okay? Eternity with God. That is something that each and every one of us need to do in ourselves. Okay, God isn't going to do that. God isn't going to forcibly make you pursue him. All right, even after you're saved. All right, you have that option rather to continue to pursue or not to pursue God. You have that option rather to have that goal of eternal life with God in the new heaven and new earth or not. It's up to us. And he's saying here, look, that even though you're under persecution, don't give up. Even as Isaac went to the first well, he dug the first well, it was taken from him. He could have gave up and said, "Oh, I can't do this. This is impossible." He didn't do it. He went to the second well. Same thing, dug it up. It was taken from him. He said, "Look, I am pursuing this to the end." And he said, "I'm going to the third well." He went to the third well, dug it up, and it became theirs. Same way with us. We're not to give up. No matter what comes our way, no matter how many times it comes our way. It could be through persecution from our friends and family. It could be persecution from our government. It could be through sickness. It could be through all kinds of different ways. But we are not to give up, because even as Isaac said, hey, now we can be fruitful because God has given this well to us. We can be fruitful. If we don't give up, we will enter that rest. Now, the other rest I talked about was the rest that we have through Jesus Christ when we give our life to Christ. But the rest he's saying here is what comes later, the eternal rest. And we read about that clear toward the end of the chapters of Revelation, where God creates a new heaven and a new earth. God comes, all evil's done away with. All the saints of God move into this new heaven and this new earth, and God himself comes and dwells with man. Wow. And that is for all eternity. And that's a rest. That's the final rest that we are to be looking for. And I hope you are looking for that final rest. So even as a Christian, don't give up no matter what comes your way. Strive like Isaac did, okay? Don't give up. No matter what happens, keep moving on, keep moving on, keep moving on. And what? There will be that day when we will be finally in that eternal rest. Well, I'm out of time for this week. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can at radiooutreach@yahoo.com. That's radiooutreach@yahoo.com. Till next week, God bless.